My father, a healthy, sturdy man who had been through and seen a lot in his long life, came home from work that night at the third hour of the morning. When he crossed the threshold of the apartment, I did not immediately recognize him. His pale hands, trembling slightly, unskillfully removed his shoes, and his face showed anxiety and perhaps even fear. If I had seen him in this state about 7 years ago, when he had just started working at our city crematorium, I wouldn't have been particularly surprised. In all that time spent at the crematorium, he had witnessed various events and had gradually become accustomed to people's tears and grief. In the early days, he would often come home crying, and at the table, he would talk about children, relatives, and their behavior in the burial hall, describing their faces and blank stares stained with tears. Over the years, he had experience with the relatives of the deceased, and his greatest fear was to look through the viewing window and see the huge ovens that blazed as they received the coffin with the deceased. But, as is often the case with people, he was able to get used to any living and working conditions, and cremating people became routine for him, like a cook preparing a meal in a restaurant or a mechanic fixing cars. I won't go into the details of how and why he took such a job. I'll just say that the circumstances were right. So, coming home late at night, I was awake and found my father in this state. I asked him, "Dad, what happened?" He only glimpsed me and retreated to the kitchen, silently taking off his sneakers. "It's okay," he muttered. "It's okay. It happens." He seemed to be having some trouble at work. Realizing he couldn't fool me, my father replied, "I don't even know what to call it." He pulled a bottle of vodka out of the fridge, poured a full shot, and drank it down, wiping his lips with his sleeve. It's worth saying that he rarely drinks after work lately, not as often as he did in the early days. Mom and I knew that if he came home and immediately grabbed a bottle, something was wrong. It was at this time that my mom woke up. It was as if she sensed something was wrong. "Why are you up so late, dear?" she asked, entering the kitchen. Dad wanted to say something, but he stammered. His eyes were running around the room, and his tongue was not obeying. Mom, seeing Dad in this state, became nervously concerned. "What's wrong with you? You're completely out of your mind. And of course, it's all because of those problems at work." After we listened to everything he had been through today, it turned out that problems at work was a very, very mild way of putting it. According to him, a woman who had pre-booked on the phone came to see him today. She was particularly beautiful and still young enough to be raising children. There was something a little strange about her behavior. She was in a hurry, asking questions about how she could speed up the process. We explained to her that as soon as all the paperwork was completed, we would proceed with the procedure. The father added that his job was just to push the button and adjust the temperature. He couldn't explain to her that he was just a worker here and it wasn't up to him. She even tried to offer him money for the expedited procedure, but to him, a steady paycheck was more important than a one-time bonus. He'd refused, of course. She offered a second and third time, and when she looked at him, he felt completely uncomfortable. "I don't even know how to explain it," Dad replied. "It's like I've ruined her whole life." And she turned and walked away, slamming the door so loudly that the hanging lamp almost snapped off. I stood there, watching her with my eyes and looking at Sergei from the side. Sergei is my father's colleague. and he just twiddles his thumb and looks at the wobbly door. Well, actually, this meeting with this not very pleasant lady ended, and we continued our work. And a little later, when we had already managed to forget about it, Vladimir Yuryevich, our director, came to us and said that all the papers were ready and that by evening we would have the body of the girl. They'll bring her body, and that's good. And as a farewell, will there be a funeral or not? Suddenly, Sergei asked. I didn't answer and pressed a button on the remote control, sending another dead man into the furnace. Just as the chief had said, the coffin with the girl arrived in the evening. It was hardly a coffin, of course. It was a simple wooden box, riveted together as if from the remains of a board taken from a sawmill somewhere. All right, in 7 years, I've seen a lot more than that. Not everyone can afford to burn a dead man in a nice, expensive box. He's going to burn it anyway, so what's the point in wasting it? Well, the body was brought, and I'm standing there, and I feel that the coffin is already smelling a little. We're supposed to check all this stuff out. Well, maybe there's another person in there. The coffin was unloaded. I went to it, and it was nailed shut. Would you excuse me, of course? I turned to the woman. But I have to check. I have to open the coffin. I can't do that. It's the rule. I don't know if there's another person in there. Can you say goodbye to your daughter? We've already said goodbye, the woman replied hurriedly. She was in a hurry to get rid of the corpse as soon as possible, as if she were trying to hide something. It looked that way. It was strange. It seemed so to me, but I was used to not asking questions and doing what I had to do. The paperwork's all right. The boss has given the go-ahead, and now it's just a matter of finishing the job. In 2 or 3 hours, you'll be able to pick up your daughter's ashes. Do you have an urn or what? I don't have an urn. In that case, you can buy one from us. You'll have just enough time to do that. Down the hall and to the right, there's a little shop. I showed the woman the way. She sort of went, and then she came back to me and leaned over and whispered so quietly that no one could hear. Can you throw the ashes somewhere or scatter them somewhere? I'm sorry, but I can't do that. As politely as possible, I replied. I held back so as not to be rude to her. Your daughter is dead. Not only did you not even bother to buy a proper coffin, you did not say goodbye, you did not pray, and you want to throw away the ashes. Even though I don't meddle in the affairs of others, it wasn't normal. But as it should be, the customer's wish is the law, and we had to do it. The mother, sniffing her nose, went towards the shop, and Sergei and I carried the coffin to the stove. We could hardly find a nail to open it. We stood there, pulling out the nails one by one, and the more the lid opened, the stronger the corpse odor became. Is it rotting there or what? Said Sergei. Well, judging by the smell, yes, answered I. And finally, having gotten rid of the last nail, we opened the lid. Indeed, in the coffin lay a young girl. I compared her face with the photograph. Yes, it was her. The body had begun to rot in some places, but her face was still fine. How long had she been lying there before she started to decompose? A child, Sergei asked again. The certificate says she died yesterday. That can't be. The colleague was surprised. She died yesterday, and she had already started to stink. And I look at the girl, and in some places, especially on the legs and on the stomach, just below the chest, there are such spots. Well, it's not our business anymore. Close up and let's start. The furnace is heated and it's blazing. Okay, we loaded the wooden box, the oven door opened, and the coffin slowly went inside. The sash closed, and I went out for a smoke break with peace of mind. Sergei stayed inside. I was standing there, breathing fresh air, when he ran out to me and said, "What is this?" I look at him. He looks scared. I don't know, maybe I was imagining it, but there were ovens, as if someone was screaming. "Did you look out the window?" "No, I came straight to you. You saw the body decomposing and lying there. You probably just heard something." It's time to retire, Sergei thought. You still give any young uncle a head start. Let's go and see what it is. We come to the furnace, and we have a special heat-resistant window to control the process. I open it, look inside, and there is a burnt coffin. There is no fire, everything is smoking, smoldering, but not burning. And on the control panel, there's an automatic gas shutoff for the furnace. "What is it?" asked Sergei. "No matter how many years I've been working here, this is the first time I've encountered such a thing. I've checked and rechecked everything. I tried to turn on the furnace again, and inside everything buzzed and looked like flames." "Strange," whispered Sergei. "What do you want?" "Technology can be a little tricky sometimes. It's been running like clockwork for years, and now it breaks down? Well, coincidences can happen." Not 5 minutes later, history repeated itself. When we decided to take out the burned coffin and run the furnace without it, it worked perfectly fine. Bad thoughts began to creep in. Anyway, we heated it up well, and the coffin went inside again. It kind of went up in flames. I didn't leave the window. I watched to make sure nothing went out. The fire had consumed the wooden box and was getting close to the rotting body. As I watched, I noticed the corpse's arm moving. It was very hard to see, but I did. At first I thought it was just me. "Well, the column of fire inside, what can you see there?" I reassured myself then. But when the furnace once again went out and the red light on the remote control turned on, the girl's burned face was staring at me through the window, and I only had to look away for a second. Sergei wanted something from me. I turned back, and in front of me was a face in this small window that was so scary that I involuntarily began to baptize and almost fell off my feet. There was something alive in the oven. I swear it wasn't the dead girl. Who was it? Wait, you weren't exactly drinking on the job? My mom didn't believe him, and I was having a hard time accepting what my dad was saying. "I don't drink on the job at all. You don't believe me?" Yeah, go on, Dad. It's okay." There was a demon staring out the window at me. A naked human body, charred, a head larger than a normal human head, and the face had no eyes, no mouth, no nose, all covered with charred skin. And the face was like cut into 2 parts, a black line in the middle. You don't believe it? Now, just a second, and now you will. My father went into the hallway and took his cell phone out of his jacket. He stared at me like that for about a minute. I took a picture of him. The picture my dad showed me made my hair stand up on my head, and my mom cried out. I dismissed Photoshop, editing, and other things at once because my father, as well as his colleague, have absolutely no knowledge of phones and even less of computers. And why would he do it at work? I was at my father's house more than once and understood that the photo is of the very same oven and his frightened reflection with a phone in his hands. There was no doubt about the authenticity of the photos, and already realizing that all this was real, we continued to listen to my father's story. "What is this?" Sergei shouted, and immediately after these words, the creepy face disappeared from the window. From the furnace, there were blows, hard blows. What was sitting inside wanted to get out, but the thick walls and the same door held firm. "Turn on the furnace faster, do you hear?" Sergei yelled. I stood there like an idiot, staring at the nightmare. My brain simply shut down completely, and I lost control of my work. That's when Sergei ran to the control panel and pressed the start button. There was such a wild roar inside. I can't even describe in words what it was like. You know, like the roar of a locomotive mixed with hundreds, if not thousands, of human screams. "Why were you standing there? Would you have run away?" inquired Mother. I don't know why we were standing there. That's how animal terror works, you know. I don't know, I can't explain it. The father poured another shot of vodka, knocked it back, and continued. Yes, then we did run, but not right away. It clicked in my head when the observation window in the furnace broke. Yes, I think that's when we ran. The bosses were gone. No one was in the crematorium. Everyone had already gone home. We ran out of the car and down the corridor, and then I turned around. "So she got out through this small window?" I asked. I don't know how it got out, but she stood there, and then she started following us. We go to the door, it's locked. We go to the back door, and it's the same story. Sergei was already hysterical, as if he had lost the ability to speak because of fear. I was in the same state. Who thought of locking the doors? "Where are the keys?" I yelled at him. His words were like a blade across my throat. Anyway, the best we could do was hide in the pantry, which was at least open. We sat in the dark, blocking the door with whatever we could find. I hear her walking down the corridor in heavy, shuffling steps. She passed the pantry, and we exhaled. But it was a bit early to open it and run the other way. I opened the door and looked around. There was no one, but as soon as I got out of the pantry, her head, cut in half, appeared from around the corner. Then, we ran as fast as we could toward the windows. No one thought to go back to the engine room, get the keys, and leave the crematorium. We opened the window and jumped out into the street. Don't even ask me why we didn't do it sooner. I'm telling you, my brain just kind of shut down. When we jumped, Sergei managed to twist his leg. He fell down and started yelling, "What am I supposed to do?" I couldn't leave him. I barely lifted him up and dragged him like a wounded soldier. This only looked at us through the window, and when I once again turned around about 15-20 seconds later, I did not see her there. When we had already moved a decent distance from the crematorium and saw cars on the road and other people, we felt a little relieved. I went with Sergei to the hospital and then called a cab. "I'm home now. It's awful," Mom whispered, covering her mouth with her hand. And I've been watching my father's behavior for the last few minutes, which was, let's say, a little strange. He was constantly looking around, as if searching for something with his eyes, which, by the way, were also running in different directions. My mother, apparently, did not notice it while listening to my father. I saw everything, and I heard the icon on the shelf in my parents' bedroom, which suddenly fell down. Unlike my parents, the windows are all closed. There's no draft. When my father had finished the bottle and he and my mother were going to bed, he undressed and went into the shower. He took off his clothes and socks and threw them in a pile somewhere in the hallway. I passed by and suddenly noticed movement in the pile. I look closely, and there are worms. White cadaver worms, not many, 5 of them. I wanted to call my mom to talk to her about my father, but she was already asleep, so I didn't wake her up. Tomorrow, I guess we'll talk about all this. But if I knew what would happen tomorrow, or rather today, after my parents, I went to my room and went to bed. I couldn't sleep for a long time, thinking about it all and the picture my father had shown me. I couldn't get it out of my head. Still, the fatigue of the whole day took its toll, and in the morning, I passed out. But it wasn't my alarm clock or my mom's voice that woke me up. I was awakened by a terrible smell of burning. I got out of bed. The whole apartment was in smoke, and in the hallway there were flames. Covering my face with a t-shirt, I ran out of the room and realized that my parents' bedroom was completely engulfed in flames. Mom's body was already lying breathless and burned. There were no clothes, no phones, and no documents. I ran out of the apartment and called the fire department. They arrived quickly and dealt with the fire just as quickly. My mom died. I escaped with a miracle, and my dad was gone. At least I had a good friend who I stayed with for a while. My mom was buried the day after the fire in the same cemetery where my father worked nearby. What it was and where he is now, I cannot know, but I guess that is why that woman was in such a hurry to burn the corpse in the crematorium. There was some kind of demonic power in the girl's body, and when her body was left only as ashes, that demonic force got out and took my parents. Although perhaps it walks somewhere nearby in the body of my father and is just waiting for the moment to do something terrible.